What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Shontavia Show, where my goal is to help you start a business based on your life's vision. This ain't gonna be your daddy's business advice. I'm laser focused on entrepreneurship in the 21st century, vision, and breaking the traditional mold. If you can get with that, you can get with me. Be sure to visit Shontavia.com for more episodes, blog posts, and other content. Thank you for listening. The show starts now. What's up, everybody? I'm Shontavia Johnson, and this is another episode of the Shontavia Show, where I help you start a business based on the vision you have for your life. And I am so excited, everybody, to have with me Dr. Nika White. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Shontavia.
I just love your work. I love what you're doing, and I should introduce you to everybody so they know your work and know what you're doing. So Dr. Nika White is a national authority and fearless advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equity. She's an award-winning management and leadership consultant, a keynote speaker, a published author. She's written 2 books, The Intentional Inclusionist. Is that one right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, so y'all pray for me with the next one. This is a little bit of a longer title. The Next Level Inclusionist, Transforming Yourself and Your Work for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Success. Is that it?
You did it.
All right, awesome. So Dr. White helps organizations break down barriers and integrate diversity into their business frameworks. Most recently, this is what I know most recently.
Okay.
In November of 2019, you were named one of Forbes's 10 diversity and inclusion experts you should know.
Yeah, top 10 Trailblazers for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Got it. So congratulations.
Thank
and
you.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So Nika, so many questions for you. So I follow you. I've been watching your work for such a long time. Where are you from? How did you get here? Okay. What is your story?
Oh, you're going way back.
Going way back. Where are you from?
So I am from Belton, South Carolina. So a little small town in the upstate, specifically in Anderson County. That's where I grew up, born and raised. And really, really small town. In fact, the town is so small that it required 2 small towns coming together to form one high school, Belton Honeypath. Yeah, that's how small it is.
Oh, wow. I've heard of that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. All right, cool.
Belton Honeypath. And so my story is pretty traditional to what I believe is probably a lot of people's story. I grew up in a home with both parents, loving home, both working parents, who always instilled in myself and my sister that the sky was the limit. We could do anything. They were ones, from a parenting perspective, who always would challenge my sister and I to drive towards our potential. And that's important, and I'll come back to that at some point, I'm sure, in this conversation, because everything that I have been able to accomplish in my life has been because I have viewed barriers and obstacles as nothing but an opportunity to overcome. And so I remember even like in school, if you would bring home like a B, my mom would always say, okay, B is okay. It's not that it's bad, but I know your potential. Your potential is an A. So what are we doing here?
Amen,
and that
Mama.
is how I've lived my life, and I have instilled that in my kids. And so anyway, matriculated through undergraduate. I went to University of South Carolina.
Whew, let's stop right there.
Okay.
All right, so I went to Clemson. For those of you who don't know, Clemson and Carolina have a little bit of a rivalry, a historic rivalry. Just a little bit. Yeah. I still love you, Nika. That's okay. You have done wonderful things, even given
you're way too kind to give me credit for being a Gamecock, but that's okay. See, what's interesting is that because I grew up in Anderson, as I just mentioned, in Anderson County, I grew up loving the Tigers. So Clemson was my team, right?
Okay.
And although I went to USC, my husband is a Clemson grad.
Okay.
And I always tell people that both the Gamecock and the Tiger pay the bills in my house. And so
Amen to that.
You gotta like both teams, right?
Amen.
So anyway, yes, I went to University of South Carolina. I actually went through their J school. So
cool.
I thought that I wanted to work in the field of marketing communications forever. And that has given me such a solid foundation. I absolutely love the industry of marketing communications. I love the on time, on budget, on strategy, the rat race, right? All those dynamics. I felt that I was really in my element. And so when I went through the J school, I actually graduated with a concentration in advertising, public relations, and I think I graduated on a Friday, and on that Monday began working in an advertising agency, a really large, nice-sized advertising agency that's actually based here in the upstate. And I was in between both the New York office, because they had an office and a presence there, and the Greenville office, and just really fell in love with the industry. That is where I began to realize that I had this draw and this concern for diversity and inclusion, because I was met with every single day so many circumstances whereby, as marketing communications professionals, you were charged to be smart, effective marketing partners for your clients whose consumer constituencies represented diverse America. So why aren't we doing more to be more intentional about creating that level of diversity in the workforce so that we can produce smart campaigns, positioning strategies for our clients? And so anyway, that's kind of how I ended up in this space that I'm in now.
Excellent. So your background, diversity, equity, inclusion, marketing. What I want to know about is the entrepreneurship behind it. So
Okay.
you have taken all of these really amazing educational backgrounds, professional backgrounds, and turned it into a full-time entrepreneurship strategy. So how did you do that? So how long did you work like in your former position? How did you transition to being an entrepreneur?
So that's an interesting story. Entrepreneurship somewhat found me. And I say that because, again, my background is marketing communications. I understood that aspect of the world and how powerful marketing communications really was to different brands. And so I saw that just in my career path. As I was continuing to operate in this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion within still an advertising agency environment, I then was presented with an opportunity to begin doing this work on a larger scale for the Greenville Chamber. They were creating a new position. It was VP of Diversity and Inclusion, and they did a national search. I was a lucky beneficiary right in their backyard. I had some trusted mentors that said to me, Nika, this seems like it's something in your wheelhouse. You want to take a look at it. And so I trusted my instincts and, of course, the confidence that I had in those mentors, and I ended up putting my name in the hat. And I appreciated that leap of faith, and I do call it a leap of faith because on paper the position was funded for 3 years, and I knew the history. I knew that there was some baggage there. I knew that I would have to spend a good bit of my time trying to regain the trust of those constituents that quite honestly felt that the chamber was not relevant to their needs. But in doing so, I surrounded myself around so many entrepreneurs who were just perseveringly willing to give it all that they had to make it work. Not to mention, my husband is a serial entrepreneur and has been since day one that he and I met. And so I saw it, and I guess I kind of viewed it as, it was his season, so I supported him in his entrepreneurship endeavors. And after he was doing that for so many years, and I was, really progressing in my career as a D&I practitioner, I started getting tapped, and people were asking me, can you come help with this? Can you come and kind of consult with me around this project? And then I started noticing that this area, this discipline is high in demand, And so I saw it as an opportunity. So even while I was working still as VP of Diversity and Inclusion for the Greenville Chamber, surrounded by all of these entrepreneurs, all of these key business community leaders, I was being very strategic, and I was kind of developing my exit strategy, if you will. I didn't know the timing of it, but I knew that it would come, and I knew that I wanted to be ready. And so I started preparing myself. And what did that look like? I ended up writing books. I ended up on the topic, of course, that was, really in the center of what I wanted to be known for in terms of my brand. I began to accept speaking engagements. I asserted myself in many different community endeavors and boards, being able to operate directly with the lens of equity and inclusion in those spaces. I pursued my doctorate. And I didn't do it because I wanted some additional letters behind my name. I did it because I felt as though it was going to be pretty instrumental in setting me up with the credibility that was needed. And even I was intentional about the route. I did not go the PhD route. I went the DM route, and that was important for me because my intent was not to be a part of some type of research higher learning institution. I wanted to be able to go into organizations and drive change, and so my doctorate is in management organizational leadership. And I could have probably gone even more specific to diversity and inclusion, but that wasn't my intent. I wanted to be seen as someone that could bring thought leadership to all areas of business within an organization. But yet and still, I knew that part of that was going to be certainly a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's my story.
Wow. How did you find time? So you mentioned writing books, accepting speaking engagements, pursuing a doctorate degree, you're married with children. You've mentioned
Yeah.
your husband and kids. How did you manage the time?
So, Shontavia, I have somewhat of an addictive personality, and I have to be honest about that. I mean, while I think a lot of it was really just being intentional with my time and my planning, I began to really operate true to my calling, which is, knowing when to say yes and when to say no. It's what I kind of teach and coach other people around, and so I began to do it for myself. And there were seasons in my life where I was not open to a lot of different opportunities to extend myself. I have two kids, and my kids now are pretty self-sufficient. I have a senior in high school, and I have a daughter that's a sophomore in college. But when my kids were younger, that's when I was in this support mode of helping my husband build his business, supporting him while he was building his business. So fortunately for me, when it became my time, my kids were older and again, more self-sufficient, but I had that support. My husband was the one that was kind of cheering me on. And because his business had already reached a foundation where it was very profitable, we were able to fund the start and launch of my business. And so a lot of it is just, again, knowing where you have those gaps and being communicative enough to be able to try to put people in your corner, in your tribe that can help support you. And knowing that there's a season for different things. And I just had to wait for the right season. And that's what I did.
So how did you know it was the right season? You mentioned being at the chamber were
Yeah.
you there for the full 3 years or longer than 3
No,
years?
I was there for about 6 years in that
Okay.
role before I then
Okay.
transitioned out. So I knew it was time because, again, my calendar was starting to fill up. Any kind of PTO that I had, I was, filling it up with accepting, opportunities to go and speak and train and consult. And so I remember one day I was having conversations with the leader of the chamber, the president, CEO, who was very supportive of the work that I was doing within the chamber. And we just had an honest conversation about the trajectory of my career path and where I wanted to go. And he, within his own words, basically shared, your reputation precedes you. I know that if I'm going to have you around to continue to help building upon this great equity that you've created in the work here at the chamber, that we're probably going to have to be creative. And so that led to just an honest conversation for me to be able to share and disclose what I wanted to do. Then it was, well, how do we make this happen? Because I want to see you be successful, but I also want to see you be closely connected to the efforts here. And from there, it happened very quickly.
So many questions, Nika. I don't know how much time we have here, but so you mentioned in your PTO, so your paid time off.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were maybe side hustling, but building.
It was a side hustle.
Was it side hustling?
But I really didn't consider it a business at the time. It was
Okay.
exactly that. It was a side hustle, before the benefit of, at some point, this is going to mean something.
Yeah.
And I knew that whatever it was going to mean was going to be related to some type of future entrepreneurship endeavor.
Yeah.
That's all I could tell you at the time. But I was committed to it because I knew that it would eventually pay off, and it did.
So many people I work with who have full-time jobs say, I don't have time. I don't know how to start on whatever this entrepreneurial endeavor is. So you mentioning paid time off makes so much sense for so many people, right? Were there other things you were doing? Were you traveling on the weekends? Were you doing anything else to manage your time? It sounds like you were
I was
juggling a
investing
lot.
in myself. I was immersing myself in the industry. I became a certified diversity executive through Society of Diversity Certification. I was reading lots and lots of books. Even my dissertation research was, grounded in the work of diversity and inclusion. So I was intentional, and that's an important word for me. It's actually one of my favorite words. That's why the first title of my book is Intentional Inclusionist. I believe there's such power and intentionality. And it has a certain look about it. It's very calibrated. It requires, foresight, and it requires believing in all the steps of a process to get to an end goal that's worth it. And so, it's interesting. I tell this story often, Shontavia, but when people go and it's time to do the strategic planning for an organization, right? We have no issues walking into a conference room with our flip charts, our markers, and, a draft of the mission statement, vision statement, just tearing them apart, right? Just tearing them apart to refine them, and then identifying those goals and objectives, and then how we're going to track and measure it. But I rarely find that people are just as diligent about doing that for their personal lives. And I believe in personal strategic planning. And so
Amen, Nika.
I remember when I started having these thoughts about, okay, so what can be? Again, what are the possibilities here? Because again, I've already shared with you that I've been grounded to be this person that believes in true potential, not just what you can see, but you break through that glass ceiling, right? And so as I was really strategic visioning around what I want my future to look like and what I wanted to be attached to, I began to map it out. And that's where some of those decisions came from. They were informed by this ultimate goal. And so if I find myself kind of, wavering from that goal, I will pull out my strategic plan and we will get the markers and the flip charts and we will refine it. But I think that's what has allowed me to stay to course. And I'm a real big fan of people doing personal strategic planning.
Brilliant. Brilliant, brilliant. So 6 years in the chamber, you decide to jump completely
That leap of faith
into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
What were your first steps? If you could give people advice on like the 3 things you have to do if you decide to become an entrepreneur, what would those things be?
Well, I think first and foremost, you need to be clear about your product and your service, and that requires doing enough research to understand, is there a market for it? What's going to be the distinction that separates you from others? How do you differentiate yourself? What is your brand? And as a marketer, that was important to me. I spent a lot of time developing my brand. What does it look like? What are the colors? What's the message? And also being true to understanding what am I good at, because I knew that with this type of business as a consultant, I was my brand, so that's why I mentioned before, I needed to really invest in myself and make sure that I was prepared. And then I think just, again, surrounding yourself with people that have been where you are, that can support you, that can give you that sense of community, whereby sometimes you feel a little vulnerable because, you're thinking, this is territory that's new for me. How do I do this and do it successfully? No one has gotten to where they are on their own. We all have people in our corner that are supporting us, that are, mentoring us, coaching us. And so I think that building that network was really important. For me, my husband was a great part of that because, again, he had been on that journey, quite successful. He had built businesses, sold businesses, and started other businesses. And then he and I together as a couple, we also have 2 other couples that we align with, and we call this group Fuel Up. And it's just for that purpose. We will, pour into each other, make sure that where our cup gets empty, we're encouraging each other, supporting each other, being thought partners to each other around our own business endeavors. And so those were the things that came really important to me.
Who helped you? So you mentioned your husband, you mentioned your group, you mentioned mentors. Who were your mentors? Were there people you were following online or reading about?
So it was interesting. And someone said this to me once before, and I thought, well, that's strange. Is that even possible? And it is possible. And this is what they said. They said, you're my mentor, and you don't even know it. And it was because they were following all of my work, and they would find it very appropriate and intentional to position themselves in environments where they probably knew that I was going to be. Maybe it was an event that I was putting on. And I found that to be a little odd, but when I started really thinking about it, I thought, well, you know what? I think I have some of those mentors too. I just don't know that they're my mentors. And so a lot of the people that I learned from, and I say learn in present tense because there still are folks that I'm closely connected with in terms of following their work, and even many of them I've been able to have direct formal relationships with. But I remember when I was starting out in this role, a dear friend of mine who used to be directly in the upstate area, but now is in Charlotte as a chief diversity officer, Keneal Coleman. She was a big inspiration. I saw that she was able to have conversations with people around these complex issues that allowed such a level of comfort and a level of transparency. And I love that style about her. And she had this incredible way of making people feel like whatever their areas that they felt caused them to want to, cover or mask or hide, she would bring that out of them in the best way. So I just kind of loved her style. And there's several others. But to me, it's not about just finding people who are directly in your space. It's also finding other attributes of people, especially from an entrepreneurship perspective, that you then want to try to emulate. I love people who are so confident in their business. We hear oftentimes, particularly from women, that, the imposter syndrome, right? That we're kind of faking it a little bit. Well, I know some great imposters, but I tell you, behind closed doors, they make it happen. And so even just that fortitude of having the confidence to know that I may not know exactly how to get to the end goal in this particular conversation immediately, but I'm going to let you think that I do, and I'm going to go figure it out. and whatever that looks like. And so I've had people that have, coached me through those type of scenarios. And then just building relationships. Relationships are king. And knowing what you don't know. And so I'm a big, advocate of surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you so that you can begin to really understand how much you don't know. I think there's a lot of power in that too. Although it can be a little intimidating, it's also liberating because then it kind of gives you greater inspiration to want to go and learn more. And so anyway, all of those things, I think, is what led me to a place where I began to feel like entrepreneurship was something that certainly could be in my future. And I wanted to be a part of it.
Awesome. So you say entrepreneurship. When I hear the term entrepreneurship, I think about people who solve problems, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what does...
No, not just solve problems, but solve problems for a profit. I believe in capitalism.
Amen to that.
Yes.
Amen to that. And get paid to do it.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
That's right. So what does it look like for you? How are you solving problems? What is your business model? How do you make money? What does it look like, the day-to-day?
So we were talking about this just a moment ago. So I consult and I train. The premise of my business is to intersect the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership in business. And so I go all over the country, even some international clients that I do work for. And I train, I consult. I really help them to think strategically about diversity and how to operationalize inclusion. And there's a difference there because I'm one of those D&I practitioners. I really believe in getting to the crux of the matter, peeling back all of the layers, identifying what are the root causes that's compromising inclusion and a sense of belongingness that can keep people from showing up at their best, and let's address that. And so it's not just about a program or an initiative because those have start and end dates, right? I am big on let's think about systems, culture, policies, procedures, and really shift the mindsets of all of those that are part of this organization to where everyone is owning this responsibility of creating inclusivity. And what that looks like varies from organization to organization. It really depends upon where they are within their journey of diversity and inclusion. I really like to meet clients where they are, and oftentimes that starts with a pretty deep dive cultural audit or assessment. And I always have to warn clients that, sometimes when you hear audit or assessment, people perceive that you're trying to find everything all that's bad, right? But to me, it's also about taking inventory of what's going well and then trying to amplify that. How can we put some greater intentionality around those efforts as low-hanging fruit opportunity to be able to then create this momentum that leads to greater traction and results and outcomes?
So how do you find people? You've talked about your consulting and your training. How do people find you and, sign on that dotted line and say, hey, yes, I'll hire Nika to do X, Y, Z? So I think so many people are afraid of asking for money, asking to be paid, and figuring out, navigating all of that. How do you navigate that?
Well, so I'm a firm believer that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. You're there to make money, to be profitable. You're not there for a hobby. There's other ways in which you can satisfy your favorite pastimes without really calling it a business. And so I'm here to make money. And my husband reminds me of that all the time as someone who, again, is kind of like my business coach in many regards. But for me, I think that the way in which I attract my clients has everything to do with relationships, And again, remember I mentioned that I was very strategic when I was, transitioning towards that exit strategy. So I was planting seeds, I was building relationships, cultivating those relationships. They knew that this was something that I was already kind of doing a little bit on the side. And so it was pretty commonplace for people to hear now that she's doing this on her own. So I had already built up a pretty nice sized clientele. And then beyond that, when I go to speaking engagements, that is one of the best ways to build your business because people hear you. They can, hear that you have a high level of credibility around, the topics that you are connected to. And it never fails. It always ends up resulting into additional opportunities and additional business. And then, I'm also a marketer at heart. That's where I started, of course, with my career. And so I believe in marketing, communications, and branding. And so I do a lot of that to keep my name out there. I develop a lot of content. And I think that being visible in meaningful spaces and creating those meaningful relationships is a large part of it. I am fortunate to be at a place in my business. And again, we're just talking a little less than 3 years where I can be very selective about the opportunities I say yes and no to. And that's not always the case, And again, as a consultant, I am my brand. Now, what I'm going to have to think more strategically about is how do I scale? We were talking a little bit about that because right now I am my brand, and I feel like a lot of the way in which I make money is very contingent upon me, you
Right.
know? And at one point in time, I said that I was not really interested in having this large enterprise where I had all of these W-2 employees. I was really set on building my business around partnerships through 1099s. But now I'm having to revisit that because of the sheer volume of potential opportunities that are coming to me.
So in your business, you mentioned consulting, you mentioned trainings. Are there other things you do to actually make money? So you have 2 books you're
Yeah.
selling. Are there other things? Do you have classes? Do you have other things that you do?
Well, I do offer virtual training opportunities, and that
Okay.
doesn't require me to physically be there. So that's something that's creating some, consistent revenue. I do have a number of clients that are retainer based, and so it's not just kind of a one and done. They're ongoing relationships, and in that regard, I serve as an outsourced chief diversity officer, if you will. And so if you think about that role and how big that role is, I'm always looking for other ways to be able to bring value to the organization. And so that tends to lead to other projects as well. Of course, again, I'm an entrepreneur, so I'm constantly looking for those opportunities. But yeah, the majority of my work is consulting and speaking. I do a lot of speaking engagements around, again, this broad topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'll tell you something else that I've been very deliberate about as well. While my space and discipline is DEI, it's all about leadership. And so, again, this organizational leadership decision in terms of my doctorate was very strategic because I wanted to be able to put diversity, equity, and inclusion in the center of leadership. I believe it's a leadership competency. And so that tends to open up a lot of opportunities as well. Sometimes people aren't quite as willing to engage or invest in dollars relevant to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but they are for leadership, right? And so sometimes you have to
Smart.
just be, strategic about how in which you position yourself in the work that you do.
Right. So one final question about your business. So you are doing so many dynamic things that are hard for people to put themselves out there, to create content that they share, to negotiate with large brands and large companies. How do you figure out how much to charge? How do you set
Ooh, that's a
rates?
good
How do
question.
you navigate all of that, particularly when it's you and a large enterprise? How do you do
Yeah.
that?
So it varies based upon the organization, the scope of work. Is this a repeat client? So there are certainly some nuances that informs those decisions. But generally speaking, I know the market value of what people are charging for these sorts of things. Because keep in mind, before I transitioned into a business owner, I was hiring and sourcing these types of entities to do this work for a lot of the clients that I was working with, or even the organizations that were kind of in my circle. And so I knew what those going rates were. And then also I have to look at the amount of time that's being required of me. And so I always like to tell people that what I charge has nothing to do with just the amount of time for when I'm in front of you. There's a lot of background work that goes
Right.
into getting prepared for that type of, consulting opportunity or speaking engagement, including, the years of experience and the credentials that I had to invest in to be able to invest in myself to have that knowledge base. And so they are paying me, for the convenience of not having to reinvent the wheel. And so sometimes you have to position yourself in that regard. I have, as part of my media kit, a page that says at the top, a word on value. And basically that's where I just express, I don't desire to be the cheapest, D&I practitioner.
Amen to that.
and I'm probably not, but I know the value that I'm going to deliver to my clients. And in that regard, it's not really an apple to apple comparison. And so usually I find that being very transparent about that, it actually lands on people in a positive way. They want to
Right.
know that you're fully committed.
Right.
So, and I'll tell you something else that helps me, especially if I don't want to potentially rock the relationship with all those negotiating conversations that can be a little awkward and complex. I have a buffer. So I have someone that serves as my executive assistant, and she is very skilled at helping to negotiate. And so usually she's the first line of defense, and she kind of knows my parameters. And it keeps me from kind of having to be in that tough spot,
Right.
where I really can just build the relationship and work primarily on the content and delivery of the content instead of getting into the weeds on some of those other issues. That helps
Brilliant.
tremendously.
Oh, brilliant. I
Yeah.
signed with the Speakers Bureau about a year ago. Best decision I ever made.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
they handle all of that for you, which is wonderful.
Absolutely.
So you've made a ton of really good decisions, it sounds. What are some of the mistakes? What are the things where you think, oh, I really wish I wouldn't have done that? Or I learned a lot from that mistake. What are some of those things?
So one of the things that's reoccurring in my life is that I am so results driven. And being results driven sometimes can cause an imbalance between people orientation and, being someone that's task oriented, where you just want things done. Even sometimes to the point to where the way in which you may go about the execution of getting them done could cause some people to feel alienated, not quite as appreciated and valued. So I've really had to learn to slow down. And even in the midst of my ambition, to recognize that we're working with people, and people have feelings, and they could be having a bad day, and so to drive just towards results, while that's admirable in some regards, you also have to balance that to make sure that people are on your team because they want to be on your team, they want to follow you, they want to be under your leadership. And so I think I've made some mistakes, quite honestly, just historically around being so task oriented that I didn't take enough time to recognize and cultivate relationships. And so I think I overcompensate for that now because of it. You heard me say just a moment ago that relationships are so critical,
right,
and such a big part of I think entrepreneur success and just success in general. So yeah, hopefully I've learned from it.
No, great. And Forbes has recognized you. I see you on every top 40, top 30, top whatever list. So you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
Of course. What's the future? What's the vision for Nika White Consulting and your brand? And
it's interesting that you ask, and I think that it will all be crystallized for me, Shontavia, mid-month.
Okay.
When I get away out of the country, quiet time, just reflection time. And literally, I will pull out my pen and pad, my flip charts, right? And I will revisit my personal strategic plan, which includes, of course, my business, strategy, growth strategy, and I will let that inform what's next for me. I certainly want to grow. I certainly see that, continuing this line of work is in my future. How in which I grow, it's going to require me to rethink my business model, and I'm at that crossroads now. And so that's what that exercise is going to help me figure out.
Excellent. So if people want to find you, people want to work with you, people want to learn more about your story and your background, where can they find you?
So the easiest way is to go to my website, which is nikawhite.com, and that's NIKAWHITE, just like the color.com, and it has all of my social media platforms out there. It has access to where you can order my books. I produce a lot of content, white papers and articles that are free for consumption, and so I hope that you will join me and follow me and learn a little bit more about what's going on with Nika White Consulting.
Oh, man, this is wonderful. I wish I had a pad and a pen. I should be taking notes right now. This has been wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for thinking of me. I appreciate you wanting to.
Well, I've been following your work for such a long time. And I remember when you were at your former employer, then at the chamber, and seeing your work and thinking, man, she's really doing it.
Well, we are similar in that nature because, Shontavia, I've been following you as well. You're kicking butt on your own.
Well, thank you.
And so I am just, you may think that I inspire you, but you inspire me in so many ways as well. And so that's what we have to do. We have to support each other.
Amen, my sister. We do.
Awesome.
All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as me. Head over to Shontavia.com. Leave a comment if you have questions or feedback about this episode. If you have questions for Nika, please go to her website, nikawhite.com. I'll make sure to drop a link in the show notes and in the notes below so that you can find her easily. You can also ask questions about other things. So Nika has talked a lot about pricing and strategy, and I love this idea of a personal strategic plan. Yeah. And I teach myself a lot about vision and creating a vision for your business and brand. So head over to Shontavia.com for more resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Shontavia Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment wherever you're listening. You can find me on social media everywhere, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and wherever else at Shontavia JESQ. You can also visit me at Shontavia.com to find a transcript of this episode, along with other show notes. While you're there, please be sure to subscribe to my email newsletter. The information shared in this podcast and through my other platforms is designed to educate you about business and entrepreneurship, and I love to do this work. While I am a lawyer, though, the information I provide is not legal advice and does not create or constitute an attorney-client relationship. The Shontavia Show is a Leverage Incorporated original. The show is recorded on site in South Carolina and produced at Sit and Spin Studio in Greenville, South Carolina. Original music and sound design is by Matt Morgan and Daniel Gregory. Mixing and mastering is by Daniel Gregory. And the video is by GVL Media.